Part 7. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 63. Blood, for Subai, is now the sweetest delicacy, and it is also a thing that can arouse his interest, because to a certain extent, it is Subai's food. At this moment, Fatty and Yugo were on the dance floor, having a great time touching their partners with their hands. The women were also panting and almost moved by their teasing. Subai followed the waiter and arrived outside a private room. The waiter knocked on the door lightly, then went in, came out after a while, and then left, but the items on the tray were missing. Subai had been standing beside the potted plant behind the pillar, hiding his figure. Then he stepped out and walked to the door of the private room. There was a window on the door of the private room. Through the window, Subai saw three people inside. Personal. A man in a straight suit was kneeling on the ground, and two monks were sitting cross-legged on the sofa, as if they were chanting a spell. The cups of blood were placed on the coffee table. After the two monks finished chanting the incantations, they directly picked up the cups in front of them and began to slowly taste the fresh blood inside. They drank slowly, their Adam's apples constantly moving. The middle-aged man in a straight suit continued to kneel on the ground and worship, very piously. Subai frowned. He must have found a cult ritual place. There seemed to be nothing of interest in it. Subai couldn't help but be a little disappointed. If it was just this kind of pretentious business, Subai would really be too lazy to intervene. This is something that the government should take care of. However, just then, when Subai was about to leave, he suddenly saw one of the monks suddenly vomiting, the kind of retching. The monk covered his mouth with both hands, and his abdomen heaved violently. Immediately afterwards, a blood-red bead appeared in Fan Monk's hand. In an instant, Subai's eyes were fixed on that bead. Subai still had that kind of beads. Last time, with Ji Xiang's help, he got a small box for himself. He was not willing to eat any of them. Of course, it was also because these things were not allowed to be brought into the story world last time. Subai was directly brought into the story world as if he was a different person, and he could not be cleaner. In reality, it seemed that he was not in any danger or injured, so there was no need to eat that for the time being. However, for Subai, the more the better. The man in the suit took the bead from Fan Monk's hand, not caring that the monk had just vomited the bead, and put it directly into his mouth and started chewing it. Immediately afterwards, the man in the suit showed an expression of enjoyment on his face, and then continued to kowtow to the two monks. The two monks held Buddhist beads in their hands, then stood up, seemingly ready to leave. One of them also picked up a bank card from the coffee table and put it into his sleeve. Subai retreated, hid in the darkness again, and held his breath. For Subai, there is almost a natural bonus when he is hiding now. Whether it is a vampire or a cold poison with a bit of a zombie feel, Subai has taken away the aura of a living person. Two Buddhist monks came out. Their clothes were indeed a bit weird, but CD is close to the Tibetan area, and people from ethnic minorities wearing national costumes are often seen in CD, so the clothes of these two people did not attract too much attention. Unlike the eastern coastal areas where Subai lived before, such costumes were rarely seen there. The man in the suit also came out, but he did not go with the two monks, but walked in another direction. Subai looked at the backs of the two monks, and then at the crowd of people on the dance floor who were still indulging. After thinking about it, just to be on the safe side, he took out his cell phone and called Yigu. Hey, Abai, what are you talking about? I can't hear you clearly. Yigu answered the phone, but because of the noise around him, he couldn't hear Subai's voice clearly. Subai hung up the phone directly and edited a text message. If you find out something, come together and go to the back door. After sending the text message, Subai continued to follow the two monks secretly. As expected, the two monks went to the back door. At the back door, The two people were standing on the roadside, probably taking a taxi. Subai leaned against the stairs. After a while, Yigu and the fat man came over drunk. The fat man's clothes were very disheveled. Subai pointed at the fat man's crotch. The fat man was stunned, stretched out his hand to touch, then turned around, pulled up the zipper, and then turned around. Subai pointed to the two monks at the door. These two people are a bit interesting. Looking over, his eyes narrowed slightly, and then his hands began to caress gently. In Subai's sight, he saw the small gourd on the waist of one of the monks move, and then he smiled. It's interesting. They have some skills. These two monks also have some skills. What? Fatty suddenly became interested. For them, the biggest inner demon is whether they can survive in the next story world, and the key to survival is whether their own strength is enough to protect themselves. Some things, you can exchange it from Wadian, but the exchange price in Wadian is too high, and the story points are too precious. Therefore, it is also a good thing to search for some useful things in the real world. Of course, this requires enough luck. After all, those kind of metaphysical people are very rare among the entire human social class. It is very difficult to meet them and get some secret books or magic weapons from them. At this time, the fat man was no longer unhappy that his good deeds were interrupted, and his eyes began to shine. Apparently, he had made up his mind to kill the two monks. These people always use the back door when they go out. They are not good birds at first glance. Fatty, I think that for the sake of social harmony and stability, we need to take action to suppress them. This is also a good thing that benefits the country and the people. The fat man rolled up his cuffs and was about to get on, but then he stopped him with his hand. Why are you so anxious? These two monks are obviously planning to go back. Maybe they have some dens here, such as the sub-rudder and the main altar. There must be more good things there. We want to know how to put a long line to catch the big fish, but those two monks have a few crooked melons and cracked dates. You like them, fat man, but I still don't like them. The fat man stared at it and said in surprise, Fat master, I really underestimated you. I didn't expect you to be so insidious besides liking older women. While the two monks were talking here, they stopped a taxi and got in. Subai and the others came out immediately. Another taxi happened to come by the roadside, and Subai and the others got in the car together. Our friend is in front, just follow the car, Subai said directly. In this way, the two taxis drove from the third ring road of CD to the city center of CD first ring road. When they arrived at the entrance of a high-end residential area, Fanseng's taxi stopped. Subai also stopped here. The fat man knocked around and smacked his lips a little. I originally thought these guys would be hiding in some wilderness on the outskirts of the city, but I didn't expect to live in such a nice place. They are so damn rich. Yigu also got out of the car and straightened his clothes. If you don't follow me, you will go far away. Subai and the other three followed the two monks into the community from a distance, and then the two groups entered the elevator together. Yes, 5 people squeezed into the elevator. The two monks pressed the 13th floor, while Subai pressed the 15th floor. When the elevator reached the 13th floor, the two monks left the elevator. When the elevator door closed, the fat man gasped, Grandma, these people don't take showers. They smell bad. They are all rancid. Original flavor. Yigu spit out these two words. After the elevator reached the 15th floor, Subai pressed the 13th floor button. The three of them came down from the 13th floor together. There are so many rooms, how can you find them? The fat man muttered. Yigu pointed to his nose and said, My nose is better, let me. But at this moment, the door of the room in front suddenly opened, and Subai and the other three quickly turned sideways and entered the stairway. A total of 4 monks walked out of the room and stood at the elevator entrance. They seemed to be quite happy and were communicating with each other, but Subai and the three people hiding here couldn't understand what they were saying. Soon, the elevator came up, and the four monks entered the elevator. When they saw the elevator going down, Subai and the others walked out again. The fat man walked directly behind the door, then gently leaned in with his ear. There is no one inside, but the door needs a key card to open, let's. Hugo came over and touched the door with his palm, and then the door opened. Use your mind to push the lock cylinder directly. Yes, you can use this to get rich in the future. The three of them entered the room together. The walls inside were all covered with dark red wallpaper, which looked very depressing. The fat man must have drunk too much in the Shasha dance hall and felt a little urgent to urinate. He loosened his belt and walked to the bathroom. Then the fat man cursed. These guys filled the bathroom with stuff, and even put hats and clothes on the toilet. Aren't they peeing? Isn't there a spittoon here? Hugo said, pointing to a clay jar outside the bathroom, and then walked in to look for something. Subai was also rummaging inside. However, Subai accidentally got his hands stained with red paint while turning a very rough hemp rope. He had to walk back to the bathroom to wash his hands. At this time, the fat man was holding his thing in front of him. The clay pot was peeing. The fat man pointed it down and ignored it. His head was tilted towards the bathroom stall, as if he was looking at the portrait hanging there. However, Subai, who had just walked over at this time, saw a line of white smoke rising from the clay jar, gradually forming a figure with disheveled hair and wearing white clothes. The man's face was close to the thing that was pouring water under the fat man. Kept stirring. It was like helping the fat man with his mouth, but the fat man didn't even realize it. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 64. Just do whatever you want within the limits allowed by the rules. The fat man's talisman was not very powerful, but he couldn't bear the large quantity. The dozen or so talisman papers were scattered, and for a moment the electric snakes danced wildly. The three monks who were holding the toad and chanting the spell directly leaned against the wall in paralysis. On the bed, his body began to feel weak, his lips were trembling, and he couldn't recite the incantation at all. Even the three toad-like things began to foam at the mouth. At first glance, this guy's darts are simply an invincible weapon under the control of his mind, especially in short-distance battles. It actually reversed its direction and stabbed him directly in the throat. Subai raised his head, his fangs appeared again, and he rushed out like a crazy beast. He slapped a monk directly on the face with one hand. The force of the palm was not very strong, but the power contained in the palm was the cold air directly froze half of the monk's face to death. The monk opened his mouth and screamed in pain, but Subai ignored him and continued to pounce on the next monk. An attack of this level by the three brothers, especially when faced with these four monks whose level is actually only half a bucket of water, is really as easy as chopping melons and vegetables. Fatty hit the opponent by surprise with a talisman paper, and Subai was in a mess. The collision made these monks completely focus on one thing and not the other. In the end, they were idly looking at the court and harvesting heads at fixed points. In other words, the three of them acted together at once, and all four monks died on the ground. There were screams of fear from the surrounding residents, and there were also women's screams. "Brothers, the wind is blowing hard." The fat man ran away holding the spittoon, followed by Yigu holding the painting. Seeing that they actually wanted to take the elevator, Subai shouted directly. "There must be policemen down there. Take the stairs first, and then jump out of the window when you get to the third or fourth floor." Middle. The fat man immediately turned his head and ran up the stairs after Subai. The same thing happened at a glance, but he was much more relaxed when going down the stairs. Because he had the power of mind to help maintain balance, he sat on the escalator with his butt half spread and slid down very quickly. Easy. After arriving on the fourth floor, Subai climbed out of the window at the entrance of the corridor, grabbed the sewer pipe with both hands and slid down directly. He kept rubbing the palms of his hands on the sewer pipe, causing his skin to be torn and bloody for a while, but it was also extremely effective. The potential energy of Sudbai's own fall was offset. After his feet landed, Sudbai squatted on the ground and gritted his teeth. He endured the pain and watched as his almost rotten palms gradually recovered. In the past, Sudbai also thought vampires were cool and could recover immediately after being injured. But after what happened to him, Sudbai no longer felt that way. The pain when the wound appeared and the flesh and blood when it recovered were gone. The pain involved is no less than the pain when injured, it is simply a kind of torture. When Sudbai's hands recovered, Fatty and Yigu also came down. These two people were much more powerful and capable than Sudbai, so they were much easier to do some things than Sudbai. In the distance, the lights of the police car parked at the door of the building could be seen. Sudbai and the other three walked around and left the community, and then took a room in a nearby hotel. After entering the room, Sudbai took a shower first. When he came out wrapped in a bath towel, Sudbai saw Fatty and Yigu sitting on the same bed respectively, playing with the objects they brought out. "I'm hungry, let's order some takeout," the fat man said, touching his stomach. "You guys eat, I'm tired, I'm going to bed first." Sudbai lay on the bed and covered himself with a quilt. The fat man looked at Gugu, who also shook his head. "I've been working hard for now, go to bed early, you can just have lunch when you wake up." Yigu got off the bed, probably ready to take a shower. "Damn, you guys aren't eating. Fatty feels lonely eating alone. Isn't there instant noodles in the room? Eat that. By the way, Fatty, eat the bucket of instant noodles upside down. Dig out the bottom and soak it. Wait until you check out tomorrow to eat the bucket of instant noodles. After you straightened it and left it there, when the housekeeper came to check it out when you checked out, they thought you hadn't touched the instant noodles, so you didn't have to pay for the instant noodles. Fatty." That night, Sudbai slept very soundly. Although the whereabouts of himself and others were likely to be traced by the police, he was not very worried. Anyway, there were two people around him. If something happened, they would take the responsibility first. Chant. When the noon sun shone in, Sudbai opened his eyes and saw Yigu sleeping on the same bed as the fat man. It was probably because he fell asleep first, and they were too embarrassed to come over and squeeze with him. After going to the bathroom to wash up, Sudbai took out his mobile phone and looked at the restaurants around him, thinking about going to eat together when the two of them woke up. At this time, Sudbai found a message on WeChat, which was from Lychee. "I gotta go. Be safe." Sudbai thought for a while and could only reply with these 4 words. "Jixiang, stay at your home and take care of me." "No problem. I hope you're still alive when I come back." "I hope so too." The conversation ended here. It was very simple, because the relationship between Sudbai and Lychee was originally very simple. Last night while eating bone pot, Sudbai asked Yigu and Fatty how tall the Lychees were. Fatty answered very, very high, and Yigu answered very, very, very high. Then, the 3 grown men immediately agreed in unison. "Let's end this very unproductive discussion about how tall Lychees are." Sudbai took out his phone and read the mission notice again. He couldn't exchange or upgrade his bloodline and physique now. The way to upgrade through WeChat stores was basically blocked. Fatty was strengthened by a Taoist priest. Although the things he learned were very diverse, but the main body was always upright, and Yigu strengthened his willpower. Both of them were on the right path, and they couldn't give Sudbai much experience. Looking at the environment in the story world in the picture, since it was in a forest, he needed to redeem some things that could be used in the forest. However, Sudbai was not sure whether the things could be brought into the story world. If he was in reality, I prepared things and exchanged some props in the WeChat store, but in the end I was not allowed to be brought into this specific story world. Then wouldn't my efforts have been in vain? However, I still have 600 story points. If I really keep them all, it would be a pity. If I die. Subai shook his head. Yes, story points are the same as wealth. Life brings things that death does not take away, and it is not even as good as wealth. Wealth can also be turned into inheritance and left to others. If story points are not used, oneself will die. It's really useless and no one else can use it. Holding his chin, with a glass of water in front of him, Subai scrolled through the screen of his mobile phone. In the item list, he saw a lot of items with less than 500 story points, but Subai still hesitated. Then, Subai saw a set of soft hedgehog armor. This soft hedgehog armor looked no different from a set of ordinary thermal underwear, but it had a good physical defense effect. This required 500 story points. What is unpredictable now is whether the next story world will allow the audience to bring something into it. If they are allowed to bring something, then what is allowed to be brought? Thinking about it, in Subai's opinion, if it can be worn, then a piece of clothing that can be worn like underwear on the body should be within the allowed conditions. However, Subai also looked at the skill list and found that blood and physique cannot be exchanged. And enhancement, but some skills are still open to Subai, such as some vampire skills and some zombie skills, but now it seems a bit useless. Those skills that are well known by real vampires and zombies, Subai actually has. There was no way to exchange it at all, which made Subai feel speechless. He was completely different now, and the road ahead would be really difficult. After others obtained enough story points, they could upgrade quickly and safely. Now he had a story at his fingertips. Points but don't know how to spend them. After looking at it for a long time, Subai smiled and reached out to rub his chin. However, at this moment, Subai suddenly felt a pain in his chest and fell to the ground. Hiss. The two old men who were sleeping soundly on the bed also rolled out of the bed together and began to curl up on the ground and howl. Finally, more than 10 seconds later, the three of them regained their composure. The fat man coughed a few times and yelled, "What kind of evil is this? Hasn't the mission already been released? Why is it happening again? Damn, you're addicted to horror radio, aren't you?" Hugo sat up. Subai picked up the phone and found that a new preview message had arrived. After clicking on the message and reading it, Subai was a little surprised and said, "The newly released mission information has not changed, it is still exactly the same as the one sent last time." "What the hell? It's exactly the same here." "Are you kidding me?" Yigu also looked at his phone and cursed. "It's exactly the same here, huh?" Fatty's exclamation attracted the attention of Subai and Yigu. Among the audience members I am participating in, besides myself and Subai, there were two other audience members whose names I contacted and knew were displayed. Now the names of these two people have become mosaics and cannot be seen. Well, that's the change. Yigu directly kicked the fat man on the butt. "Fat man, I'm such a, why did you the three of us again just to see these two mosaics of yours?" You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 65. After that day, during the period before entering the story world, Fatty basically meditated and even stopped eating meat. This was cramming and adjusting his condition to the best before entering the story world. Fatty himself also said that sometimes he really regrets exchanging his body for this Taoist priest. Although there are not many taboos, but based on his experience, after being drunk with big fish, meat, and wine, when the body is not feeling well and refreshed, he can use Taoism. At this time, the effect will be weakened by several percent, and by this several percent, it is very likely that you will lose your life in the story world. Therefore, the fat man has been watching Subai and Yigu ordering various takeaways in the past few days. He always eats rice porridge with pickles, and he can only drink one porridge until he is full, which really makes the fat man very uncomfortable. But in order to survive, this appetite can still be temporarily given up. Yigu was looking into the distance in the room, standing there for several hours. Occasionally, something would suddenly fall down in the room. This was because he was tired. At this time, he would choose to rest and then continue to practice, so this most of the cups, water bottles, and other items in the room that are not very heavy are basically in a suspended state of 1 centimeter high. Compared with these two, Subai seemed a little more relaxed. He didn't really need to practice. He just packed up all the things and prepared them. They were basically things used for camping, and he didn't know if horror broadcasts were allowed for these things. Take it into the story world. Finally, the time was almost up. Fatty set up an incense table in the hotel room and solemnly lit incense and prayed for blessings. Subai and Yigu were sitting on the bed at the back. At this time, they did not tease Fatty about feudal superstition and self-deception. In fact, on the other hand, they themselves also need this kind of self-deception. After all, this is a group mission of 20 people. Generally speaking, there will be no more than 5 people who can survive. Finally, the hour hand turned to that angle, and 3 white lights appeared, covering Subai, Fatty, and Yigu in turn. After the light disappeared, Subai found himself standing on a highway, with Yigu and Fatty standing beside him. "Haha, the 3 of us are really together," Subai said. The fat man twisted left and right, then touched himself, and then said with a bitter look on his face, "The horror broadcast just left 3 talisman papers for the fat man. I have 30 talisman in stock, so just give them to me. I have 3. The fat man was on the verge of tears. "I only have 3 darts." Yigu shook the pocket on his waist. There was a pair of darts there, and these darts were exchanged from the WeChat store. There is a special bonus when controlled by the mind. Subai took out a red box from his pocket and opened it. To Subai's surprise, all the red beads in his box were there. "I still have this one." Fatty was not surprised. It is easier to bring things redeemed from the WeChat store into the story world. Horror broadcasts are not very strict about these. This is why Yugo and I want to go to reality so much. We speculate that the reason for searching for some things in the world is also because the horror broadcast encourages not to redeem it from the WeChat store, but to rely on your own ability to go outside and improve it. However, this time, is this all we have left? It should be more than that. "Look, isn't there another car over there?" Subai pointed to the car parked on the roadside behind. It was a very old-looking car, but it should still be drivable. Subai walked over, opened the car door, got in, tried it, and the car started. "It's okay to drive, get in the car." Yigu and Fatty also got in the car together. After getting in the car, Yigu was speechless and said, "Where should we get in the car and go? By the way, have you received the main mission?" "No," the fat man shook his head. "Neither do I," Subai replied, "but there is a map here." The map was placed on the co-pilot's seat on Subai's right. There was a large red circle marking a location. The meaning was obvious: go here. This is the plot guide. If you don't follow the plot guide, the 3 brothers will end up miserable. This is a common rule between the audience and the horror broadcast. Hee, there's another wallet here. Yigu spotted this from next to his seat. "What's in it?" Fatty asked. "See if there's anything like an ID card. Maybe this is a clue." "No, just some US dollars," Yigu replied. "Forget it, Abai, let's drive first. Let's go to the destination first. The soldiers will come to cover up the water and the soil. The 3 of us will take care of as much as possible if we can. At least, after sleeping together for so many days, carrying guns and going whores together, We have accumulated a little sense of trust. Subai nodded, followed the map's guidance, and started the car. After driving for more than 10 kilometers, a gas station appeared in Subai's field of vision. Brothers, according to the map, our destination is really in a big forest. There is a gas station in front and a convenience store inside. Since there are dollars in the car, let's go and replenish supplies. Okay, stop the car. The fat man nodded. The car stopped at the gas station. Subai got out of the car. Looking at the desolate appearance of the place, he couldn't help but feel a gloom in his heart. The gas station was shabby and the convenience store was shabby, and obviously the owner didn't clean it often. However, there are people here, the gas station can still be used normally, and there are people walking around in the convenience store. What do we need? Asked a consultant. Nearly $1,000, which should be enough to buy a lot of things. When you first come to the story world, it is best not to break the rules before you are fully prepared. This is a habit of the audience to avoid danger. Moreover, excessive behavior may lead to extremely terrifying chain reactions. Gasoline, medicine, food, beer, etc., the fat man said. Then, the fat man looked around and said, "What a shame. Why is this environment like the opening scene of an American horror movie, with a group of innocent boys and girls driving a car, prepare to go into a holiday cabin in the forest to have some fun, and then buy groceries at a gas station on the side of the road outside the forest, and then the terrifying prelude begins." Yigu reached out and patted the fat man on the shoulder. "Damn it, fat man, you are right, but there is one thing I really disagree with. Do you have anything to do with innocent boys and girls?" The three of them walked into the convenience store while talking. There was a fat black man standing behind the counter in a convenience store, watching TV. He didn't say hello when customers came. "Boss, we need gasoline, and we also need..." The black boss waved his hand directly. "The gasoline is in the back, go get it yourself, the shelf is over there, choose it yourself, and then come over here to pay the bill." Subai was silent, nodded, and then called the fat man and Yigu, and the three of them went to choose something together. While wandering around the shelves, Subai suddenly saw someone else inside. The layout of the convenience store is a bit strange. There are shelves in the middle, a sales desk on one side, and a restaurant-like place on the other side with some tables, chairs, and benches. At this time, there were actually about a dozen young men and women sitting there. There were very young people there, probably all college students, and all foreigners with blonde hair and blue eyes. Yigu poked the fat man and muttered, "Look, the boy and girl you talked about are here. They look pretty good. In fact, the taste of Western women is really different from Chinese." Before Yigu finished speaking, the fat man covered Yigu's mouth with one hand. "Be more reserved, damn, you are obsessed with these NPCs in the story world. Do you have any bottom line or moral integrity? What's the difference between having sex with them and having sex with an inflatable doll? And they are not people, wives, or your exclusive taste. I've got my things, let's go and settle the accounts." Subai said to these two guys. Subai also took a look at the dozen Western men and women. They sat there quietly playing with their mobile phones or in a daze, as if waiting for someone. In line with the principle of doing more than doing less, Subai didn't go there too much. Concern. The black boss settled the bill impatiently. After paying the bill, the three of them returned to the car holding their things. The fat man put the gasoline in, and then suddenly saw a poster hanging on the back of the car. The poster was quite big, but it looked a little cautious. "Is this the movie poster for Death Comes? Damn it, why didn't we notice it when we got in the car before?" When he saw that he was already in the car, he heard the fat man's cry and said directly, "Tear it off, fat man. It's too unlucky to stick it to the car. Become." The fat man tore the poster off the car directly behind him. Then the three of them got into the car together, with Subai driving the car, and the car quickly drove deep into the forest. Ding dong. The save time is over and the story world officially begins. Story world name, Death's Taunt. A dozen Western men and women who were sitting in the store stood up together. Everyone's eyes became very solemn and solemn. Standing at the front was a man wearing a red jacket. The black boss was startled and shouted, when did you enter my store? However, before, the black boss was actually only a few meters away from these dozen Western men and women. The mission has begun. Everyone, be more careful. I hope everyone can go back safely, so let's work hard together. The young man in the red jacket cheered to everyone around him. At this time, a torn poster floated into the convenience store. This was a corner of the poster, and there happened to be a skull and a movie promotion slogan on it. Come on, we are waiting for you to come and appreciate the charm of death. A young Western woman looked at the poster, her lips trembling a little, and said, "It's the warning those Easterners threw to us. They are devils. Yes, they are the demons in our story world this time." The way the fat man looked at us was like looking at his prey and dinner. It made me so scared. The young man in the red jacket held the poster in his hand and shouted to everyone. As long as we all unite together, those three yellow-skinned monkeys are definitely no match for us. They should be the gods of death in this story world. If we work together and kill them, we should have completed the mission. Let's work together, come on. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 66. The forest was very dense and large. The further you drove in, the fewer decent roads there were. Fortunately, there were guide signs such as wooden signs around. Subai could barely control the direction of his car. He was about halfway. Hours later, he finally arrived at his destination. The destination was marked with a name on the map, Hilton Vacation Home. Originally, Fatty and Yugo were sitting in the car thinking about how luxurious this holiday home should be or how many maids dressed as bunny girls would be there, but the more they went, after leaving, they all gradually gave up their fantasies. Of course, this fantasy was not very strong to begin with. Although both of them were a little confused, they both knew where they and others were going and what they would face. This, in fact, it's a bit like an old farmer lying on the dry land and dreaming about a good harvest when the weather is good. However, Rao was mentally prepared. When Subai stopped the car, Fatty and Yigu still opened their eyes wide. In front of them, in front of everyone, was an extremely old and dilapidated wooden house, but there was a brand new piece. The sign reads, "Hilton Vacation Rentals welcomes you." A house that was so dilapidated actually had such a high-end name. The fat man got out of the car with a disgusted expression and began to unload the things and prepare to move them into the house. Yigu leaned against the car with a lifeless expression, looking at the holiday house in front of him in a daze. Subai walked to a small river next to the holiday house and stood on the small rotten wooden dock. There was also a wooden boat tied to the dock. The river water is not very clear, but it is not the kind of turbidity that is discharged into industrial wastewater. It may be because the activity is not very sufficient and the water upstream and downstream cannot be quickly connected and exchanged, so it looks a bit gray. I raised my head and looked at the sky. The sky was getting gloomy at this time. Part of the reason was because it was evening, and part of the reason was because it was going to rain. This atmosphere is really suitable. Subai squatted down and looked at himself reflected in the water. He was a little lost for a moment, but then, he suddenly saw another face emerging from the bottom of the water, looking at his own image in the water. Subai's eyes widened suddenly, but the next moment, the water surface suddenly rippled slightly, and everything returned to normal. In this environment, any incredible phenomenon is likely to occur. It is actually very naive to think that the things you see that are not consistent with common sense are just because you are dazzled. What made Subai a little depressed was that while he was waiting for the talent to arrive, the fat man had just moved the things in, and the signs of the sign had already appeared. According to this situation, it will be difficult to calm down and live in peace this time, even tonight. Subai reached out and scooped up some water in the river, feeling the coldness of the water. He took one last look at the river, stood up, and walked towards the wooden house. There is not much dust inside the wooden house. On the contrary, unlike the shabby appearance from the outside, the furnishings inside are actually very rigorous and exquisite. However, most of the furniture and the ground are still stained with a thin layer of dust. But for the 3 people who did not intend to vacation here, it is already a good place to stay. Well, let's just make do with it. There are several rooms over there, but for safety reasons, let's sleep together by the fire for a few nights. If anything happens, it's good to have someone there. Take care of. Subai and Yigu both knew that although Fatty said he was afraid of an accident, in fact, an accident would only happen if there was no accident. The fat man lit the stove and generally cleaned the coffee table and chairs. Subai took out the food he bought at the convenience store and spread it out. After it was completely dark, the 3 of them were sitting by the stove. Everyone had a beer in their hands, and some sausages were being roasted in the stove very rudely by the fat man. The 3 of them enjoyed this moment of tranquility very cautiously, because no one knew when things would happen, but what was generally certain was that things would definitely happen. It's done, but it's a little burnt, don't mind. The fat man took out the sausage and divided it into portions. Subai took a bite of the grilled sausage. To be honest, the taste was not very good, but the satisfaction of being able to eat hot food at this time is indeed difficult to describe in words. At this moment, a pop sound suddenly came from the river outside the window. Even though they were eating, the 3 of them still had something to worry about in their hearts. They stood up immediately, put down their sausages and beers, quickly opened the door and rushed out. At this time, the 3 of them joined together to face the unexpected situation. It is far more advantageous than having everyone in a room and passively enduring one danger after another. Often the protagonists in many horror films separated themselves despite knowing that there was danger, which led to the last one. Then comes another tragedy. The previous sound could clearly be heard coming from the river, and the 3 of them immediately arrived at the small pier. The fat man held a flashlight in his hand and shined it directly into the river. Then, he quickly discovered a shining object. "What is that?" the fat man asked. Yigu frowned and tried to use his mind to sense the thing, but he still shook his head. "It's a bit far away and I can't reach it with my mind." "Well, it seems like the lenses of the glasses are reflecting light," Subai suddenly said at this time. Yigu and Fatty looked at each other, and they immediately made reverse speculations based on Subai's analysis, and found that it was really possible that if there were eyes, it meant there was someone. The fat man immediately continued to shine with the flashlight and found that there seemed to be a shadow area around the reflective area of the lens. With his preconceived impression, he could immediately guess that it was a corpse. What should I do?" "There is a floating corpse in the river," the fat man asked. "Go down to the river and fish out the body. There are 20 listeners here. The timid ones will starve to death and the bold ones will starve to death. Whenever we encounter something, we will rush forward. No matter what kind of mystery this broadcast is, we will do it. Don't be afraid to move forward, but we want to see if we will be the ones who die in the end." Subai started to get off the boat while talking. The small wooden boat was a bit old, but the quality was still good. "That sounds like a good idea. Isn't it a scary atmosphere? Let's dig graves and tear down temple doors. This is actually a good way to survive." The fat man also got off the boat, but because he was too heavy, although the boat was still bearable, it shook for a while when it went down, so Subai had to squat down to maintain balance. After Yugo also got off the boat, Yugo and Fatty took wooden oars and started rowing. The boat had a heavy load, so it didn't slide very fast. However, when they were about to pass a corner, the three of them finally confirmed that the body seemed to be hiding from the three of them and was also floating, and it was definitely not following the current. Speed. There is a cliff here at the bend. It is not very high, only 4 or 5 meters, but it blocks the line of sight very well. When the boat of Subai and the others rowed past, the fat man immediately turned off the flashlight, and the three of them were silent together. At the same time, he stopped the wooden paddle. Over there, there was a human voice. Although it was a bit far away and it was not very comfortable to hear, it was indeed a human voice. Sophia, don't be angry. Jack didn't mean to embarrass you just now. I know, Lawrence, I am not a child anymore. I know what I did was wrong. I shouldn't use everyone's drinking water to wash my clothes. But you don't have to do it now. I just came out and asked everyone to take their clothes and wash them in the water, and then put them by the grill to dry, so that everyone can wear them when we set off tomorrow. Everyone was very tired when we were on the road this afternoon. But there may be danger here. The 3 eastern demons will appear at any time. Jack even said that they may be watching us nearby, looking for opportunities. We are only a few dozen meters away from the camp. Moreover, Lawrence, you and I are both strengtheners, different from those who are still experiencers. If those eastern demons want to get close and attack us, we will let them need them. Even if we use them as bait to lure those eastern demons over, as long as we persist for a short while, the others will have the opportunity to come and surround them. If this happens, it will not be able to do anything about those 3. If there is an eastern devil, then we don't have much hope of survival in this story world, because we have already tried our best. Sophia, you are right, you are so great. No, I'm just comforting myself. After all, I just made a mistake, didn't I? Sophia turned back and smiled sweetly at Lawrence. Then, next moment, a hand suddenly stretched out from the water and grabbed Sophia's neck. Sophia was caught off guard and pulled directly into the river. Sophia! 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 Damn it, why is there such a big movement? There is the sound of water and people are screaming, the fat man muttered. Fat man, where's your flashlight? Turn it on and see what's going on, Yigu reminded him hurriedly. Okay, hey, why doesn't it light up? Is it a bad contact or is it filled with water? The fat man took the flashlight in his hand and started shaking it. Phew, it finally turned on. Lawrence, what's wrong? What happened? Lawrence. A group of young Westerners rushed over from the camp. Lawrence pointed to the lake with some shock. Exactly. At this time, Fatty's flashlight finally lit up due to his tinkering, and because Fatty was shaking the flashlight up and down, when the flashlight lit up, it illuminated Fatty from bottom to top. Most people have had this experience and impression, that is, putting a flashlight on their chin in the dark, and suddenly it lights up. The picture can definitely scare the unsuspecting person to death. This scene shocked all the Western youths on the shore. Some people immediately shouted in horror. They are demons, they are yellow-skinned demons. They are here and they attack us. Poor Sophia became their first victim. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 67. Why is the scene so familiar? Subai suddenly said, and at the same time, his brows slowly wrinkled, as if he was thinking about something. The fat man pointed over there and said, there are a lot of people over there, they look familiar. What are they talking about? English. Yes, it's English, Yigu also said at this time. He is a high school teacher and is more sensitive to this aspect. I remembered that I had seen a black horror comedy movie before. From the beginning of entering the convenience store to now rowing, we completely followed the pattern of that movie. Comedy horror movie, Fatty immediately became more energetic, then are we the protagonist or the supporting role? Based on the plot of that movie, what we are doing now is actually what the protagonists do, and then a bunch of supporting characters on the other side will try to kill us, and then they will kill themselves in a daze, using various methods. Suicide by such a chance is similar to the feeling of death coming. It means we won't die and nothing will happen to us. That's good. Ah. Whoosh. The fat man was just talking excitedly when he suddenly let out a scream. A javelin completely cut from a wooden stick pierced his arm. Fortunately, the fat man's arm was rich in flesh, but such a thin stick was inserted like this. The severe pain and sudden dangerous stimulation in his arm caught the fat man off guard. At this time, Yigu immediately opened his hands, and an invisible wall of mental power opened up. Then, arrows and javelins made of wood kept coming, all of which hit Yigu's mental wall. How can this be considered the treatment of a protagonist? The fat man was about to cry. He endured the pain, gritted his teeth, and pulled out the small wooden stick from his arm. Then he immediately tore off his clothes and bandaged the wound. The whole set of actions was completed in one go. It seemed that the fat man was like this. He does have a lot of experience in this field, which also indirectly shows that injuries to him were commonplace in the past. Subai put one hand under the boat to support his body. Then, he felt a moisture in his palm, and Subai's eyes suddenly opened wide. The boat is leaking, quickly, get to the shore. Yes, the house leaked and it rained all night. This small wooden boat, which originally seemed to be of good quality, actually started to leak at this time. However, before the three people on board could row the boat to the shore, a sudden impact came from the bottom of the boat. Boom! The hull of the ship shook and began to split. It was obvious that it could no longer hold up. Plop! 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 Subai, Yigu, and Fatty fell into the river together. Fatty and Yigu kept holding on, keeping most of their bodies still floating on the water. Subai, because of his previous position in the middle of the boat, so when the boat cracked, it also cracked from Subai's side first. Subai himself fell headfirst into the water. However, Subai's water quality was also good, so he would not drown in this situation. The fat man's flashlight also slipped to the bottom of the river just now. Subai opened his eyes under the water. Then, he saw a scene that made his scalp numb. At the bottom of the river, there were rows after rows. People are walking below, corpses one after another. Among them, there was a man wearing what looked like an old office uniform. He raised his head slightly. His face had completely rotted away, leaving only a skeleton, but he actually still wore a pair of glasses on his face. The eye sockets are silver, reflecting light under the light of the flashlight. Although the other person was expressionless, Subai could feel that the other person was smiling. Immediately afterwards, the opponent slowly rose up and swam directly towards Subai. Below, more and more corpses began to slowly float up. At the same time, their hands and feet kept shaking aimlessly, like sharks that smelled blood, and began to run towards their prey. Subai immediately came up and his head came out of the water. Before he could say anything, an arrow was shot at him. It was inconvenient to move around in the water, so Subai didn't dodge. The arrow shot directly into his shoulder. On the water, the force caused Subai's body to sway again, and his whole body turned over on the water. At this time, a hand suddenly grabbed Subai's shoulder, grabbing it from above. The body that was floating below was still a certain distance away. Puff! Subai surfaced again and spit out a mouthful of water. The fat man held Subai with one hand and asked, "Are you okay?" "It's okay, below." Whoosh whoosh. Sharpened sticks and arrows continued to be fired one after another, and it became increasingly difficult for Yigu to resist them, because the direction of the arrows coming was not fixed, and it was difficult for him to take full care of them. "Get ashore quickly, we can't stay in the water anymore. Those people are getting closer and closer to us." We are at a huge disadvantage in the water, Hugo shouted. Under the water, there are many walking corpses, many, many, and they are coming soon. Subai finally revealed his findings at this time. What? Fatty and Yigu were shocked, and they put their faces under the water together. Although the light from Fatty's flashlight was getting weaker and weaker, fortunately, they could still see clearly. There were indeed silhouettes of people below. Approaching here. How can this be fun? There are people on the shore and ghosts under the water. Abai, is that how the plot of the movie works? Subai shook his head with a wry smile. How can we have the good luck of the protagonist? The people opposite are not just supporting characters with impressive IQs. Yigu yelled and his eyes began to become bloodshot. It was obvious that he was planning to forcefully activate his body's potential. Brothers, I might faint later. It's up to you. Don't push me away after sex and say it's too hot. Fatty. Subai. Yigu shouted loudly and grabbed the shoulders of Subai and Fatty with both hands. Then, the three of them began to slide backwards quickly. The speed was so fast that the voices of the people on the shore gradually disappeared. After holding on and pulling the three of them back to the small pier, they finally spit out a mouthful of blood, then looked hard at Fatty and Subai, and finally fainted. The fat man was injured, and Subai was responsible for dragging Hugo out of the water and carrying him on his back. Can we still live in this wooden house? The fat man asked a little worriedly. Now I am half injured. I fainted immediately after looking at it, and I lost half of my combat power. If I continue to live in the wooden house, those people will find this place sooner or later. It's not even a day into the plot, and we are leaving the cabin like this. This is against the plot. Subai said. Fat man, you are responsible for taking care of me. I will go over there and try to lead those people away. They won't come to us, at least we can buy you some breathing time. That's too dangerous. Subai smiled and pulled out the wooden arrow on his shoulder. They are just these weapons, and their killing effect on me is not very obvious. I can bear it, but you can't. Subai took out a kitchen knife that Fatty bought from a convenience store from Fatty's trouser pocket. You guys go back. Okay, Cheng, please pay attention to your own safety. After Subai turned around and ran into the woods, the fat man put Yigu on his shoulders and walked into the cabin. He put Yigu on the chair by the fire and stood up unsteadily. You damn fat man is not gentle at all. The fat man was not surprised at all when Gu woke up like this. He just said. Is this how we are doing? Haha, sending him away is also to protect him. Otherwise, the spoils will be unevenly divided. You and I will attack each other, and then there will be no room for his share. But he is also quite wise, and he also knows how to go out and stop it. Those people will save you from coming up with this suggestion again. If Lychee hadn't left, I wouldn't have snatched his share. Fatty shrugged and said, what we discovered together, we naturally have to share together. Nonsense, if Lizzie didn't leave, I wouldn't be like this, but who asked Lizzie and the others to leave temporarily, at least for half a year? A lot of things have happened in half a year. We can't be nannies for half a year, right? What kind of thing is this? Is it worthy? You can't say that. He is a pretty good listener. What's important here is absolute strength. Without strength, it's just shit. Yigu stood opposite the stove. Okay, stop talking nonsense. I don't know how long that kid can last, but with his vampire physique you should be able to hold them off for a while. You are a Taoist heritage, so you should be able to open the formation here. Come on, let me move the furniture and let's go faster. The fat man nodded and began to direct the group to move the furniture. After the last chandelier moved out of position, the flame in the stove went out instantly, and then the wall behind shrank, revealing a dark space. Let's go and have a look. Yigu patted the fat man on the shoulder. The fat man was stunned for a moment, sighed, and then bent down and got into the fireplace together with Yigu. On a slope outside the cabin, Subai sat alone on a wooden stake, holding a cigarette in his hand but not lighting it. The kitchen knife was inserted into the muddy ground in front of him. In his sight, in the wooden house lit with candles, there were two figures moving through the window, and the two shadows were both moving. There is something called innocence, but at the same time there is another thing called reality. Subai understands this. At this time, Subai felt a rustling sound coming from the woods behind him. Subai smiled and pulled out the kitchen knife. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 68. In this world, there is no love without reason, and there is no hate without reason. Lizzie did make some moves to remind and help Subai before, but that was because of her previous friendship with Subai's mother. She and Subai didn't have much friendship. A big reason for this was because after the death of his parents, Subai, who inherited the family property, did not continue to be a philanthropist. Instead, he adopted an indifferent attitude towards his parents' previous behavior. Otherwise, he might be able to get more love from Lichi. Subai could feel this himself, so he didn't have much hope that Lichi could help him, or in other words, he never asked for anything extravagantly. As for Yigu, Fatty, and Subai, the three of them seemed to be very close, and they had gone to prostitutes and carried guns together, but whoever took this simple fair-weather friend relationship seriously would be a fool. Subai can accept and understand this. Of course, he still feels uncomfortable in his heart. A group that he agreed with before is now clearly pushing him out. As the excluded and ignored party, he will indeed be unhappy. With the kitchen knife in his hand, Subai held his breath, lit the cigarette, and then inserted the cigarette into the branch of the tree. Then he squatted down slightly and hid behind a nearby tree. Whoosh! Whoosh! Two arrows were shot together. One arrow hit the big tree, and the other arrow directly shot the cigarette butt away. The abilities of these Western youths are indeed not bad. At least, they can use it. To arm yourself with the existing conditions, you are by no means the kind of character who just sits there and waits for death. Subai closed his eyes slightly, unmoved at all. Finally, the sound of footsteps came, very soft, but still noticeable. It's two people. These two people are both male. One has long ears and should be of elf descent. The other's eyes emit a slight light gray light, which should be a skill similar to eagle eye. Search. One of them said in English. The two people quickly came to the area where the cigarette butts were. At this moment, Subai suddenly opened his eyes. The distance is almost there. Subai is experienced in killing people, and he has been thinking about how to combine his previous killing experience with his current characteristics. Maybe Subai's current strength is not very strong, but if he can use a lot of strength with 80% or 90% strength, it is definitely more powerful than those who have 20% strength but can only use 30% or 40% strength. The elf enhancer reacted very quickly. He drew his bow and knocked an arrow, turned around and shot directly behind him. The whole set of actions was not sloppy at all, showing his absolute calmness. Whoosh! The arrow hit Subai's lower abdomen. Subai exerted force on his waist and withstood the force, and continued to pounce forward. The eagle eye enhancer pulled out the javelin attached to his back, stabbed Subai's thigh directly, and stirred the situation. Subai staggered, but immediately grabbed the javelin with one hand and pulled it back. The eagle eye enhancer leaned forward and involuntarily leaned towards Subai. Subai slashed with his backhand. The kitchen knife was not very sharp, but it had a cold aura at this time, and it directly cut across the eagle eye enhancer's neck. The eagle eye enhancer's eyes widened, and he couldn't believe it until he died. He actually died with a slight swing of the opponent's kitchen knife. Centered on his neck, the icy cold had frozen many of his muscle tissues to death. He indeed died extremely quickly. The elf enhancer pulled out the arrow. This time, he did not open the bow and knock the arrow, but directly pierced Subai's shoulder. Subai's body trembled and he knelt down on the ground, but then, Subai grabbed it with both hands. The elf enhancer's legs were pulled hard, and the elf enhancer was thrown to the ground by Subai. Subai immediately jumped on the opponent. Puff. The elf enhancer actually had a knife ground out of iron. He obviously had very professional fighting skills. He was calm in the face of danger and reacted very quickly. He stabbed the sharp knife into Subai's neck. Subai let out a hoarse roar. However, what made the elf strengthener find it incredible was that even though his body had been injured in many places, the opponent's strength seemed to be getting stronger and stronger. Then, he saw the blood red in the opponent's eyes and the corners of the opponent's mouth. When Sun Yanfang came, he finally knew why, but it was too late. If he was given another chance, he would never give the opponent a chance to get up close and fight with him. Snapped. 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 Subai's kitchen knife struck directly on the elf enhancer's face. The originally handsome Western blonde man became unrecognizable under Subai's almost cathartic chop. Taking a deep breath, Subai got down from the body, took out a blood-red bead from the box in his arms, and put it into his mouth. The pain in the body kept coming, whether it was the pain of the wound or the pain caused by the pulling of the skin, nerves, and blood vessels during recovery, all were completely borne by Subai. This was a kind of torture that ordinary people could not imagine. Staggeringly standing up, Subai put away the javelin and bow and arrow, carried them on his back, and then quickly disappeared from the area. Subai was not too far away from the cabin, but changed to a slope to continue hiding. He bit a tree branch in his mouth. When the pain came, he bit the tree branch to relieve his pressure, and waited until after his clothes were completely soaked with sweat. Subai finally spit out the branch that was almost bitten off. The effect of the blood beads is indeed very good. My recovery speed has also become much faster, and I have become more mentally excited. Putting everything in front of him, Subai continued to wait for the second wave of people. The other party should be conducting a scattered search of the group. As long as he did not face more than 3 enemies together, Subai was confident that he would still have a chance of ability. Suddenly, a thin sound came from the diagonal direction of Subai. Subai immediately held the javelin still sticky with his own blood in his hand, and then quietly sneaked over. His speed was not very fast, but his voice was almost silent. At this moment, Subai felt that his heartbeat seemed to echo the sound of the wind around him. He was like a bat sneaking in the dark night, slowly searching for his prey. This is a strange feeling, a feeling as if he has reached a perfect fit with his bloodline and physique. Maybe, there is a saying that a blessing in disguise is a blessing in disguise. Subai temporarily lost the ability to rely on WeChat stores to redeem himself to improve himself. The ability of blood, but it can therefore continue to explore themselves to move forward. Finally, Subai slowly poked his eyes out from the bushes. 3 meters in front of him, a man was kneeling on the ground, kneeling in front of a tombstone. And, still sobbing softly. Subai was sure that this man should be one of the Western youths, but his behavior at this time was obviously unusual. Suddenly, Subai realized that he seemed to have ignored an issue, that is, in this story world, his real enemies were not actually these Western audiences. The Western young man suddenly stopped kneeling, held the javelin in his hand, and pierced his abdomen directly, and then began to take out his intestines and other things from his abdomen, as if he were a sacrifice, preparing himself for the devotee. And he had to clean himself up before offering sacrifices. This was a very terrifying feeling, and Subai's fingers turned slightly white because he was holding the javelin tightly. "Good boy, Come to mother. Suddenly, Subai heard a gentle call. Immediately afterwards, he found that everything around him changed, became warm, and became very comfortable and cozy. In front of him, an old woman was standing there and stretched out her arms to Subai, as if get ready to hug Subai. Subai stood up and walked towards the old woman actively. I'm so hungry, good boy. You'll let me drink your blood, won't you? Yes, I will. Subai replied dully, then took out the kitchen knife, cut his wrist, and scarlet blood slipped out. Come on, good boy, give me your arm. I'm so hungry. You are such a good boy. Subai handed the wound to the other person's mouth, and the old woman immediately began to suck Subai's blood. She sucked it very quickly and violently, and kept looking at Subai with gentle and kind eyes, encouraging Subai. Hint. Subai always had a smile on his lips, a pious smile and a satisfied smile. However, if someone stood nearby and saw the scene here, they could see a palm-sized blood leech sticking to Subai's arm, with its mouthpart poking through the wound Subai had made. Gudu, gudu. The sound of blood sucking is very obvious, with a rhythm that makes people despair and fear. And Subai's whole body began to slowly become shriveled up, almost dozens of years older. I believe that before long, he will become a lifeless mummy. However, Subai himself was unaware of it. There was still a smile on his lips. The blood leech is getting bigger and bigger like a balloon blowing up, more and more swollen and more bright red. The wrinkles on its skin are very clear, like the ferocious face of an old woman. However, just when Subai's life was about to come to an end in this way, two groups of black light appeared in the pupils of Subai, who was almost a mummy with only skin and bones left. In the previous story world, Subai was poisoned by corpse poison and cold poison because he drank the blood of Jume. Fortunately, the task was completed in time. When leaving the story world, Terror Broadcasting helped Subai recuperate his body according to the rules. Bai's corpse poison and cold poison were suppressed. Subai's main body was still a vampire, but at this time, all the blood in Subai's body was almost drained. Corpse poison and cold poison. Currently. Erupted. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 69. The deep light in the pupils represents the ultimate intention of death. Zombies are a special kind of life that is reborn after being put to death. From death, a new self is born. Now, Subai was completely forced to reach this critical point. In fact, Subai's vampire physique and the corpse poison and cold poison in his body are not very strong in absolute terms. In fact, it is difficult to rank high. This is why Yigu and Fatty are not willing to take Subai. The reason why Bai gets a share of the pie is also the crux of why Subai has several power attributes but still can't put his status in the hearts of Yigu and Fatty. However, the most basic and lowest power, even like the glow of fireflies, cannot erase its existence. Roar. Subai let out a roar that was almost not human at all, and his whole body was almost on the verge of collapse. However, precisely because of this, the illusion effect of blood leeches on Subai was completely broken, because from the original self to the zombie self, there seems to be no special change, but in fact it is a manifestation of life. A complete change, the illusion of blood leeches naturally lost its corresponding target due to the change of object. Subai lowered his head and looked at the blood leech that was still crawling on his arm and sucking. His mouth opened, and the two fangs that originally belonged to a vampire now turned into zombie fangs. Standard. The aura of bad luck, disaster, bad luck, and other dark attributes began to ripple away from Subai's body. His withered hands grabbed the blood leech as if he were grabbing a naughty doll. The blood leech struggled violently, but this blood leech relied on its terrifying illusion ability. For example, for people who like to pretend to be gods and ghosts, it often doesn't work for them to challenge others in the bright light. The same is true for the blood leech at this time. Before it was almost completely able to play with Sudbai's applause, but now it became very helpless and pitiful when it was held by Sudbai's hand that was almost so dry that the bones could be seen. Sudbai raised his head, then raised his hand, and Sudbai forcefully stuffed the blood leech into his mouth. Not a drop is missing, not a drop is wasted. Ate mine. No need for you to spit it out. I'll just eat it with you. Return it to me with interest. The blood leech was chewed in Sudbai's mouth, and then swallowed directly. Sudbai opened his arms and kept making excited cheers that only he could understand. However, at this moment, the movement here finally attracted the attention of others. Behind Jack were two Western youths. The three of them were all covered in milky white light. Obviously, all three of them were strengthening their fighting spirit. This is a relatively common and popular strengthening mode among Western audiences. In fact, the three of them are also the three most powerful among the audience in this story world. Facing the approach of three tyrannical auras, Sudbai did not choose to dodge or even react at all. He just calmed down silently, his arms naturally hanging on his waist, and the dim light in his eyes began to become more and more intense. Deep, his face was expressionless, but it seemed to have a deep disdain. Three fighting spirit warriors surrounded Sudbai in a triangular formation. "What are you?" Jack actually asked in Chinese this time. Sudbai focused his eyes on Jack very indifferently and did not answer. Jack immediately winked at the two companions around him. The two companions rushed towards Sudbai together, while Jack focused on the main road. Roar! Sudbai seemed to be an enraged beast, and his arms began to wave wildly. At the same time, his feet slowly lifted off the ground, floating at a height of 5 centimeters from the ground. Boom! 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 The power of the three Western fighting spirit masters was unable to cause much damage to Sudbai, Yugo and Fatty when they were at a long distance, because they were not strong enough to attach their fighting spirit to arrows or javelins. A type of carrier that cannot easily withstand the force is used to carry out long-range attacks, but at this time, in the close battle, the abilities and advantages of the fighting spirit enhancer will be fully revealed. However, what made Jack frown was that the fighting spirit energy released by the three of them could not get close to the body of the zombie, who seemed to be unconscious. When the zombie waved its arms crazily, it condensed around him. The layers of ice walls actually managed to completely block the three people's fighting spirit offensive. At this moment, the voice of the terrifying radio host came from everyone's mind. It was a quiet night. The suspicion caused by mutual distrust caused one bloody incident after another. People always prefer to actively pursue the struggle with their own kind, but they often tend to ignore that around them there are actually more terrible and terrifying things lurking, dormant, and waiting. This is a seemingly ordinary forest, but it seems extraordinary at the same time. Because it's here. Die. It's not an end. This is just a prologue, a prelude, the real story has just begun. Fatty and Yugo were each holding a staff at this time. The two staffs were originally held by the statues at the end of the passage. After Fatty and Yugo took them down one by one, they originally stood here. The statue of the god who didn't know how long ago turned into dust and began to dissipate. Immediately afterwards, the tone of the terror broadcast appeared. The fat man glanced at each other. It was obvious that the two of them had triggered something, which led to the beginning of the next stage of the plot. However, just like last time, this time the horror broadcast still did not announce the main mission, which still made everyone seem a little confused. The story has just begun? Why? What should we do next? The fat man asked. Go up first, and while stalling for time, try to decipher part of the secret and function of the staff in our hands. Then we will be able to have an absolute advantage. No matter what happens again, we cannot panic. Just when Fatty and Yugo were preparing to return the way they came, the road they came from suddenly began to collapse, and the entire cabin collapsed with it. At the intersection leading deep into the forest, the convenience store continues to exist quietly. The lazy black boss still has no interest in his customers and business, but is more interested in his own TV show. He can be regarded as the black man. Many of his shortcomings are concentratedly displayed. Of course, his current situation is actually a bit excusable. His store usually has no customers for a day. Anyone who has been holding on in this deserted place for so long, psychologically, there will be some changes and some imbalances. A very old car stopped outside the convenience store. 3 people got out of the car, a fat man, an elegant man wearing glasses who looked like a teacher, and a handsome young man. There was no conversation between the 3 people after they got off the car, and they just walked into the convenience store together silently. The 3 of them did not buy food, but all stopped to choose some utensils together. Obviously, their purpose was very direct and straightforward. While checking out, one of the fat Eastern men waved to a dozen Western youths sitting behind him. "Old rules, let's go first, you guys hurry up." A dozen Western young men and women responded with smiles. Most of them showed a sense of indifference in their eyes, without the fear that they seemed to have. The 3 of them returned to the car, and the driver was a young man. "Do you know the location and situation now?" The fat man and the teacher with glasses nodded together. "Killing them will give us the opportunity and qualification to return to reality. Before dawn, it is our last chance. Once dawn, everything will be over." The car's speed did not slow down at all after it quickly entered the dense forest. When they reached the location, the 3 of them got out of the car together. One person walked towards the depths of the jungle, and the other 2 walked in the other direction. Behind them, a group of murderous Western youths had already come out. The man in the red jacket who was walking at the front had a smile on his face. He even wore a smile that looked like an eagle. But here, the battle has actually ended hastily. The collapse of the cabin caused a loud noise. This happened a moment after the terror broadcast was notified. Everyone knows that something must have happened there, which led to the plot. The change. Jack and his 2 companions immediately gave up their siege on Subai and ran quickly towards the cabin. Subai continued to wander aimlessly in the mountains like a walking zombie, like a lonely ghost who couldn't find the way home. His eyes were sometimes cold, sometimes dull, and sometimes hesitant. Just when Subai had just crossed a stream, a figure appeared in front of him. The other person threw a cigarette and a lighter directly to him, and then sat down on a stone by the stream. Subai was stunned for a moment, but slowly, the zombie temperament on his body began to fade away, his body began to fill up, his hair also changed from withered to very elegant, and his whole person finally returned to his original appearance. After picking up the cigarette and lighter, Subai also sat down next to the other party and lit the cigarette. "Do you want to pretend to be a zombie while patrolling the mountains?" the other party said in a bit of laughter. "This feeling of madness and not thinking is quite good," Subai replied. The other party reached out and patted Subai on the shoulder, then smiled. "Forget it, let's stop talking nonsense. Just swallow the blood. It will give you some more benefits. I guess sucking my blood will make your vampire level even higher. We don't have to keep counting on the one that can't be redeemed." WeChat store. Alas, I am unlucky. The strength of others has probably not changed much. In addition, with the complete change of mentality, there is a high possibility that I want to kill my own body and replace it. However, who said that my body suddenly exploded again? What's up? "No, we can have a fight," Subai said. "It's not necessary, it's too much trouble," the other party insisted. Subai nodded, opened his mouth, and bit the other person's neck. However, at this moment, a knife suddenly appeared in the opponent's hand. There was a magic circle engraved with silver paint on the knife, which had natural restraint and huge damage to vampires. Puff! The knife pierced Subai's chest. The other party laughed loudly, These are some raw materials I got at the convenience store. The fat man helped me draw a formation on it specifically to restrain vampires. You are finished. Sudbai's fangs continued to pierce the other person's neck, but instead of sucking, they were gnawing. A large hole was missing in the other person's neck. At the same time, the other person's eyes were full of disbelief. Color. I know I won't be that naive, so I would rather chew you up as ordinary human flesh than absorb you in your vampire state as you said. Sudbai's skin cracked in the wind, revealing his true nature as a zombie again. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 70. Sudbai continued to sit by the river. In front of him, there was his own head, a head exactly like his own. This picture was very unique and strange. Sudbai even felt that he should hold another bamboo stick now. Insert this human head and soak it in salt water, and finally put it on the fire to bake. The world of the story has changed. Sudbai thinks that it is impossible that there is just an extra person on his side. The rest of the people should also share the rain and dew, but his side is a little too neat and quick, just a little too fast. Sucking his own body's blood can further evolve Sudbai's vampire blood, but Sudbai did not do that because he was not so naive. He believed in himself, and understood himself better. In fact, Sudbai even felt that the other party may have taken some poison. In short, if he put himself in the other person's shoes and Sudbai analyzed his own mentality, he would rather commit suicide than become someone else's nourishment. Crossing his hands, he suddenly felt that the weather around him was getting a little colder. It was late at night and the chill in the forest was very heavy. Sudbai took out another blood bead from the small box and swallowed it into his belly. A wave of blood immediately rose in his lower abdomen. A warm feeling. Using this thing to keep warm seemed a bit too luxurious for me, but at this time Sudbai was too lazy to care about it. He stood up and looked around, suddenly feeling a strong sense of rejection towards the surrounding environment. Perhaps, I still like those weird case stories, rather than this kind of open-ended story. The pure killing made Sudbai feel that he had lost the feeling he had had before the horror broadcast, and that he lacked a true sense of horror beauty. Moreover, the current confusing mess makes people feel very baffled. Sudbai packed up the things around him and continued walking slowly. He walked really slowly, like a twilight old man. However, in this state, Sudbai's reaction ability can often be adjusted to be more precise. Sensitive. At least, Sudbai now doesn't mind whether his appearance and posture look high-spirited or glamorous. However, Lindsay I said that it was indeed very big, but there was a reason for saying that it was small. As he walked, in a daze, Sudbai found that he had walked to the small river. This small river runs almost across the middle of the forest. Following the river to the north end is the location of the cabin. At this time, some smoke rose inexplicably from the river, and under the smoke, Sudbai saw a tent by the river. There were people in the tent, there was light, and a figure sitting cross-legged and meditating could be vaguely seen. There was also someone outside the tent, a woman. The woman was sitting there on her knees, her chest rising and falling, her face a little pale, and she was obviously injured. Sudbai's arrival was still caught by the woman outside. The woman opened her eyes and looked at Sudbai. Sudbai had some impression of this woman, but the impression was a bit too vague. I remember that yesterday this woman seemed to be suddenly caught in the water. Her companions thought she was dead and frantically launched an offensive against Sudbai and others. Sophia looked at Sudbai for a while, and then slowly closed her eyes. I smelled the smell of zombies, and even the smell of vampires. It's interesting. Is there a person with two physiques at the same time? How did he do it? A voice came from the tent. The voice was young and female. At this time, the curtain of the tent was opened, and a girl with black hair walked out. The girl had a very otherworldly temperament, with a fresh and refined temperament. He has long, shiny black hair, green clothes, and silver bells on his wrists and ankles, giving him a lively look. He seems to be only 16 or 17 years old. "Hello, weirdo." The girl waved to Subai. "Why don't you come and sit with us?" Subai looked ahead. Under the bushes, there were two corpses. One was Sophia's and the other was this girl's. These two corpses should be clones. Obviously, they also killed their own clones. The new rhythm of the plot set off by the horror broadcast seems to have no impact at all. For some people, clones are just clones after all. They are just more sinister in nature, and there is no essential difference. But fake, it is fake after all. This kind of feeling is also a kind of belief. Subai walked forward slowly. The girl looked at Subai with a smile. Then, she turned around, took out some food from her tent, and said to Subai, "Are you hungry?" The food was not food bought at a convenience store, but some barbecued meat, which must have been grilled recently. There was still the salt on it. It was not completely cool at this time, and it still exuded an alluring aroma. Seeing this piece of barbecue, Subai suddenly remembered what he had thought when he looked at his cloned head. He waved his hand gently, indicating that he didn't need food now, or, to be more precise, Subai didn't need this now. Grow food. It's so strange. There were 20 participants this time, but the only people who were able to gather here and watch the river at this location by the river were only 3 of us. The girl stuck out her tongue playfully and looked. Looking at Sophia, he said somewhat proudly, "Look, there are 2 of us in the east." Sophia looked at the girl and smiled helplessly. At this time, she was still comparing which side had more people and which side was more powerful. This girl's thinking mode was indeed a bit overwhelming. "Okay, you don't eat, which proves that you are not interested in ordinary people's food now. However, my Sophia was just injured, and I am also very afraid of pain, so we can't suck blood for you. I'm sorry." The girl apologized to Subai sincerely, which made Subai a little overwhelmed. This girl had a very pure temperament, but she was definitely not a character that could be easily dealt with. There are still 5 minutes left. The second time is about to begin. The girl took a deep breath with a look of anticipation on her face. This game is so fun. By the way, last time only Sophia and I were playing, and you were not. Didn't come, so what did you find when you came here now? Subai did not answer, because he had no way of answering. That Western woman who cheated her own death, and this Eastern girl whom he had never met before, Subai had no idea about what they did and said. "Do you think the story world this time is so simple, single, dull, and boring?" The girl blinked her watery eyes and looked at Subai. Subai nodded. This is indeed the case. The story world this time seems to have fallen a little short of the standard of horror broadcasting. Hey, that's because you haven't entered this real story world before. Everyone here, except the 3 of us here, actually haven't really entered this real story world. This story world is still very exciting and wonderful, it is simply impossible to stop. As soon as the girl finished speaking, a layer of faint purple brilliance began to rise from the river in front of her. "Okay, cross the river, my Sophia, you have to be more careful next time. By the way, we are already 3 people. Next time, at most 3 people can come, otherwise, there will be no next chance. Its maximum carrying capacity is actually only 3 people, so if there are more people here next time, you know what to do. Of course, I also hope there will be no next time. I hope someone can find the source of this river first." The girl waved her pink fist at Sophia, then walked into the river freely, and then her whole body was surrounded by purple energy. In the end, she disappeared without even landing on the shore. Sophia glanced at Subai, stood up, and walked towards the river. The same thing happened. She disappeared halfway there. Subai also came to the river. This river has many secrets. What he saw before and a group of zombies walking at the bottom according to a certain pattern are probably the tip of the iceberg. The purple brilliance began to fade away, and it was obvious that it was about to dissipate. Subai walked slowly into it without much hesitation. Then, he suddenly felt that as he walked into the lake from here, the surrounding environment seemed to have suddenly undergone earth-shaking changes. Buzz. His body trembled, and his brain also trembled at this moment. Main Mission 1 released, find the source of the Forest River mission completion reward, 500 story points. The main mission of the horror broadcast finally appeared in Subai's mind. However, the next moment, he suddenly found that the position he was in was a bit familiar. The horror broadcast just left 3 talisman papers for Fatty. I have 30 talismans in stock. Just give me 3. I only have 3 darts. The voices of Fatty and Yugo came from beside Subai. Subai finally understood what happened, and finally understood what the girl said before. In fact, the real reason why this story world is so interesting. Subai took out his small box and found that the 7 blood-colored beads that should have been there now turned into 5. The 2 he had eaten before had not recovered. Closing his eyes, Subai felt the inside of his body. The power of the vampire and the power of the zombie were very active, and he could switch between the 2. These things had not changed, and everything he had experienced before had not changed. Only Fatty and Yugo around him, as well as everyone except himself, Sophia and the girl, suffered, reset. Hey, there is a car here. I told you two to come over and take a look. There is a map in the car. Is this a mission plot prompt? The fat man walked to the car and waved to the other 2 people. Because Subai took some time to check his body, he turned into a fat man when he discovered the car and the map last time. The 3 of them got into the car together, this time the fat man was driving. The fat man started the car and honked the horn. Fat Master feels that the world of this story is not simple. It has a sense of déjà vu in a horror movie, so we need to unite together. I believe we can survive. Yigu also nodded at this time. No matter what happens, as long as we are together, it shouldn't be a big problem. In a word, we share the blessings and share the hardships. Now it was Subai's turn to express his position. Subai smiled, nodded, and said one word. Good. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 71. Hey, there is a convenience store in front. It looks quite shabby, the fat man said directly at this time. Brothers, let's go down and buy some things, get some beer and drinks. The name of the location marked on the map is Hilton. Although we are not here to travel to the vacation house, we still need to get everything we need there. Damn fat man, do you really think you are going on vacation? Let's go see what necessities we need in the convenience store. I just found a wallet here. There are no other documents in the wallet, but there are some US dollars, which is enough for shopping. Become. The fat man stopped the car next to the convenience store and got out of the car. When he got out of the car, he saw that Subai was still sitting in the car and had not gotten off, so he asked with some confusion. What's wrong? I'll be responsible for monitoring the situation outside. This plot has just begun. What's going on? He looked a little confused, but he didn't go into details. He just nodded. Okay, you just watch the car here, and Fatty and I will go in and buy things. Yugo and Fatty walked into the convenience store, and Subai lowered his head slightly. He was thinking about what he should do, whether to follow the previous pattern or start the main task one directly. At the moment, Subai, in fact, there were not many clues in his hand. Subai didn't know the true identity of the black-haired woman. Sophia was still with her companions at this time, so she probably hadn't officially entered the mission yet. However, in fact, there was another very important reason why Subai continued to stay in the car instead of entering the convenience store to buy things like last time. That's the poster. Subai remembered that the phone calls between Fatty and Yigu were like this. Fatty asked Yigu why there was a poster on the back of our car, and Yigu replied that it was too unlucky to tear it up. This time, before getting in the car, Subai went to the back of the car to confirm that there was no poster. That means that the last time someone went to the convenience store when the three of them were there, someone secretly came over and put a poster saying the god of death is coming. Subai didn't know if the other party had been paying attention to this place in the dark, or if the other party would stop putting up posters because he found out that he hadn't entered the convenience store. But Subai didn't have any other clues at hand right now. You can expect to rely on grabbing other clues to bring out the clues you want to know. After all, since the requirement of the main mission 1 is to find the source of the river, most of the things and clues in this story world that affect the audience like myself should be related to that source in all likelihood. Subai lowered his head and remained silent, but Subai's consciousness was always on high alert. Suddenly, a very subtle Sasha sound came. Subai immediately opened the car door and ran to the back of the car. At this time, a flying knife shot directly towards Subai in an arc. Subai immediately lowered his head, and the flying knife passed over Subai's head and pierced into the ground. At this time, a figure immediately jumped out of the car and ran in the other direction. Subai chased after him without hesitation. The figure of the other party was not very clear. He should have used something to hide his figure, making it look a bit blurry from behind. He couldn't even tell whether he was a man or a woman. But fortunately, the opponent's speed was not very fast, and Subai slowly shortened the distance between himself and the opponent during the chase. The two people quickly ran into the forest. Finally, the other party seemed to feel that there was no way to avoid Subai's pursuit if he ran like this, so he turned around directly, and two cold gleams flashed in his hands, which must have been drawn out again. He picked up two daggers and turned towards Subai. Until now, Subai had not confirmed whether the other party was a listener or an aboriginal in this forest. However, when the other party got closer, Subai finally understood who he had met. He made various snorts with his breath, and then the body began to become thinner, and the whole person almost completely turned into a mummy. This change was very fast, almost completed in an instant. Clang! Clang! The two daggers cut on Subai's arms respectively, making the sound of weapons clashing. Because a layer of ice condensed on the outer layer of Subai's skin, the opponent's dagger did not cut Subai's skin at all. At this time, Subai quickly turned his hands and wrists, grabbed the opponent's dagger in reverse, and then pushed hard with both arms. The opponent obviously did not dare to make direct contact with Subai's cold hands, so he let go and gave up his own weapon, and take a step back instead. Subai did not continue the pursuit, and the other party did not choose to escape again. "Haha, do you know who I am?" a clear female voice sounded, and then, the blurry figure of the other party finally became clear. It was the long-haired girl, the first girl to cross the river. "I can't see your body, but I still remember the fragrance you exude." The girl's pretty face turned red, she spat at Subai, and then said, "I just want to come to you." At the beginning of the story, because I was still in need of helpers, Sophia had already helped me last time, but in the end she came out there was a problem, but it still failed, so this time, I want to come to you first, and then to Sophia. "Are you here specifically for me?" Subai asked. "Oh, I know what you are guessing. When I first came here, I came across this thing." A stone sculpture appeared in the girl's hand. There was an ugly devil image painted on the stone sculpture. Then, in the devil's hand, there was a roll of posters. The girl laughed twice and threw away the stone sculpture and the poster on the stone sculpture's hand. Gave it to Subai. Subai took it in his hand. The devil was made of ordinary stone carvings. It should have been around for a long time, but he could feel the energy fluctuations still remaining on the stone carvings. Then, Subai unfolded the devil's sticker on his hand. The poster above is, indeed, a promotional poster for the movie The God of Death. Actually, from the beginning, there was a force preventing us from completing the mission, or in other words, there was a force that was wrestling with the power of the terrorist broadcast. However, the other party was trying to protect themselves, and the terrorist broadcast was probably just because I want the so-called story to be better and more interesting, so I just follow the trend. After all, in the story, I don't think there is an energy level that can resist the horror broadcast. Subai threw the stone sculpture on the ground, gently tore the poster into pieces, and then said, "Should I leave with you now? We only have now, the period before dawn the next day, so time is very tight. I have 2 companions. If I leave like this, they will find something wrong. So what's the problem?" "I think there will be problems. You are such a rigid person who follows the old ways. Do you know that next time, someone else will probably come to that river, cross the river, and squeeze out your spot? Then what? Then, next time you think you are the beginning of this time, but I will not come to you, because my goal has been changed, and I have reached several cooperations with others, and you are already in the past tense, but you yourself don't know it at all. You think you have really discovered something. You think that next time, the next time, and the next time, it will still be your this time. You are so complacent that you think you are the first few people who tried to eat crabs have actually fallen behind a long time ago." Subai smiled and didn't answer, just turned and left silently. The girl stood there, looking at Subai's back, pouting and sulking. "Abai, you do know how to be lazy." Fatty put all his things in the trunk and got in the car. "Shouldn't it be that people like me are the most suitable for being lazy?" "Okay, let's go on our way," Hugo said. The fat man nodded, started the car and continued to follow the map. Subai sat quietly in his seat, smoking a cigarette, shaking the ashes out of the window from time to time. Neither Fatty nor Yigu told him about the strange things he encountered in the convenience store, such as the dozen Western youths he saw. Men and women, like that weird black boss. Subai understood that this was a sign that the other party still excluded him from their small group. The most basic thing was that it showed up in a tacit agreement to refuse to share details. When they arrived at the Hilton vacation home, Fatty and Yigu complained that the shabby wooden house really didn't match the name. Subai silently moved his things and entered the house first, and then pretended to organize things. In fact, last time, Fatty and Yigu entered the cabin one after another, while Subai went to the river. Subai was sure that he must have missed something, otherwise Yigu and Fatty would not deliberately separate themselves later. The turning point of the horror broadcast plot at the moment it happened, the explosion and collapse of the cabin, was definitely not an accident. After Fatty and Yugo also entered the house, Subai walked to a corner of the living room. In his hand, he silently held a glass lens and placed it on the windowsill. While pretending to look at the scenery outside, he was actually paying attention to it. Fatty and Yigu. Sure enough, after the fat man came in, he showed a look of surprise on his face at first. Obviously he had discovered something. Then, he glanced at Subai and saw that Subai was far away from them, so he walked over to Yigu and pretended to get a beer. He bent down and whispered a few words into his ear. His eyes suddenly lit up, and he immediately stood up, glancing at Subai's place as if nothing, then looked at the house again, and then nodded. "It's getting dark," Subai, who had been lying by the window looking at the scenery, said. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 72. A warm bonfire was rising in the fireplace, the fat man was grilling sausages, and everyone had a can of beer in their hands. The atmosphere was very comfortable and quiet, but the 3 people present actually had their own thoughts. It could even be said that everyone has his own agenda. After experiencing something once, it is estimated that it will leave you with a little regret and confusion at most. However, once you start to experience it repeatedly and have more time and energy to do it again, what you experience will be the most profound kind of human nature. Truth is also the most self-responsive. It is often easier to get twice the result with half the effort before proceeding with the deduction process after knowing the ending. But now Subai suddenly felt a little depressed, thinking about how unpopular he was. Yigu made some small moves with the fat man a few times, making flirtatious glances. But he insisted on not pulling himself to join in, as if he was the kind of cat that just wanted to eat alone. However, if you think about it from another perspective, isn't Subai doing this himself now? I obviously already know the main mission one, I already know clearly how to truly open and enter the real mode of the story world, but I am still pretending to be stupid here, continuing to pretend to be my old self, and not telling Fatty and Yugo these things. Maybe it's because Fatty and Yigu were in the first year of junior high school, so now Subai is in junior high school. Of course, in fact, in essence, Subai, Yigu, and Fatty are all the same kind of people. Some things that are beneficial to oneself are rare, and they are unwilling to share them with others. Feeling that it was almost time, Subai stood up with a beer and walked to the door. I went outside to take a look, and I seemed to hear the cry of some wild beast. Fatty and Yugo both nodded when they heard this, but neither of them got up. However, the fat man felt a little bit unbearable and said, "Don't go out alone, it's dangerous." "I won't go far, so I'll just go out and have a look." Just as he was speaking, there was a sudden plop sound in the river on the side of the cabin. Fatty and Yigu stood up immediately, while Subai opened the door and rushed out. Quickly arriving at the river, Subai saw a figure floating on the water. The figure was wearing glasses, which shone slightly under the moonlight. At this time, Subai jumped into the river without saying a word. Yigu and Fatty, who had just arrived a little late, were both a little confused. They felt that Subai suddenly became so impulsive and bold, which was a bit uncomfortable. Only Subai himself knew that he really didn't have many clues, so he could only use this method to grasp and dig deeply. After entering the water, Subai used the momentum he had when he jumped to quickly get closer to the corpse. He stretched out one hand and grabbed the corpse directly. The corpse trembled and then began to move, like a drowning child who finally found the person who came to rescue him, and then like an octopus, it clung to Subai. This was something Subai had not expected. He had imagined a lot of the other party's reaction, whether to flee or attack him. Subai had a way to deal with it, but the other party's shameless way made Subai the child sat directly on the wax. The body was entangled, and the corpse directly pulled Subai to the bottom. Subai started to struggle, but was unable to break free in a short time. By this time, he had already sunk. Subai knew what was under the river, and knew it, but last time it was only a relatively distant glimpse on the water, but this time, it was direct and almost zero distance contact. The corpse dragged Subai to the bottom of the river and then let go. Then, many corpses around began to approach here actively. The speed was not very fast, but there were many of them. They looked like a group of savages who had been hungry for a long time. Same thing, suddenly the food came and it was time to get ready for the party. Subai measured the gap between himself and the many zombies around him, and felt that it would be really difficult for him to get out like this. Moreover, there was no movement from above. Obviously Fatty and Yigu did not choose to come down directly to save him. This was not because of that. The two of them sincerely wanted Subai to die, probably just because of a certain degree of indifference. It is estimated that Fatty and Yigu also discovered the extremely horrifying scene under the river at this time. However, Subai was not completely helpless. At this time, his body began to become thinner, and his aura began to become dirty, disgusting and sinful, a zombie like Subai appeared. All the zombies that had been restless all around suddenly calmed down at this time, and then they quickly repositioned themselves according to the previous cue pattern, and then began to move forward almost endlessly. Subai looked around. There were all kinds of walking corpses. They were all dressed like modern people. God knows how they got into the river, but now they obviously regarded Subai as one of their own kind. So he didn't show too much interest. Subai also walked on the bottom of the river with the walking corpses around him. The main task one is to find the source of the river, but obviously it is not as simple as finding the end of the river. The source is more like an adjective, and its meaning is closer to the real reason why the river is so weird. The light of a flashlight shone down from above. When Subai raised his head, he saw a wooden boat on it. Fatty and Yugo must have also boarded the boat. At this time, some zombies nearby seemed to be stimulated by something, and began to surface on their own initiative, which seemed to mean that they were preparing to attack the ship. Soon, under the impact of several zombies, the wooden boat began to become unstable. The fat man and Yigu on top began to retreat quickly, and the speed of the wooden boat suddenly increased. This was definitely not caused by the rapid paddling of these two people on it. Yigu probably used his willpower as a temporary engine. Fatty and Yigu seemed to have given up on themselves, or in other words, on their search for the river, because what was happening in the cabin was what concerned them the most. Subai didn't have any special feelings about this. He continued to follow the walking corpses around him, because Subai suddenly thought of a question: could the destination these walking corpses were heading towards be the source of this river? Can I directly complete the main task 1 in this way? Moving forward in a hazy manner, Subai felt the exhaustion of his body. In fact, Subai could not sustain this zombie state for too long, but fortunately, this word did not require fighting, so the consumption was not very great, and he could continue to hold on for the time being. Live. They had already walked a long distance, and at this moment, there was sudden movement on the water. It was probably a woman who was washing clothes, which attracted the attention of the zombies below. The woman was still talking, but because she was too far away and across the water, Subai couldn't hear her clearly. But there are already 2 zombies floating around, looking like they are ready to hunt. This river is really full of dangers. Plop. The woman was grabbed by the neck and dragged into the water by a zombie. Immediately afterwards, she began to sink rapidly. The zombies around her also moved at the wind. However, soon, a purple bell appeared in the woman's hand. The bell rang and sounded. There were bursts of crisp sounds, even under the water. It didn't seem dull at all. At this moment, the walking corpses around him turned into extremely well-behaved babies and settled back into place. Sophia also fell slowly, just a little in front of Subai. The other party didn't seem to notice Subai, because Subai's current appearance and the scene full of walking corpses were really dazzling, and it was difficult to find anyone from here. The team, after adding 1 person, continues to move forward. Not long after, there was finally a change in the front. A dark cave at the bottom of the river appeared. All the walking corpses in front turned around the dark cave and returned to the original route. Sophia stopped in front of the dark cave. She seemed to be hesitating whether she should go in. Finally, she seemed to have regained her courage and walked directly into the dark cave. Of course, Subai would not continue to follow these zombies back home. Could it be that he had worked so hard for so long just to participate in the underwater walking activities of the zombies? However, before Subai left the team of zombies, Sophia suddenly retreated from the dark hole again, with a look of disbelief on her face. A huge gash appeared on her chest. It was very deep, almost piercing through her body, and the bright red blood flowed out, looking very beautiful. Of course, the price of this beauty is death. Subai's eyes suddenly widened. He knew that Sophia had stepped on a thunderbolt for him. What was in this dark hole? Because the rest of the zombies were turning around and heading back the way they came, only Subai was still standing there. Sophia's face was as pale as a piece of paper and she turned around. Her eyes that were about to drift away finally locked on Subai. Sophia looked at Subai, stretched out her hand, first made a 3 sign, and then made a 2 sign. Finally, she threw the bell wrapped around her wrist to Subai, pointed at herself with her index finger, and showed her face. With a look of pleading, her pupils finally dilated completely, and her whole body slowly floated upward. Yes. Completely dead.